Professional wrestling was built on one idea: a person with nothing fights, a person with everything, and against all odds, person with nothing wins. That is the whole thing. That is the engine. Remove it, and you are left with something that looks like wrestling but feels like nothing at all. WWE has removed it, not accidentally, not through laziness, through a series of deliberate decisions made at the corporate level, at the creative level, and at the booking level. The company has engineered the relatable underdog completely out of its product. And what replaced it is a version of professional wrestling where you know who is going to win before the match begins, where the good guys are sponsored by soft drink companies, and where the audience cheers for the villain because cheering for the hero feels stupid. This video is about how that happened, and more importantly, why it is never coming back. To understand where WWE is now, you have to understand where it started. In the early days of the company, the babyface was not complicated. Bruno Sammartino was a working-class immigrant who held the championship for nearly 8 consecutive years. People believed in him because he represented something real. He was not a character. He was a symbol for an audience that saw themselves in him. Hulk Hogan took that foundation and made it bigger. He was not relatable in the same way Sammartino was. He was a cartoon, but the moral logic was the same. The hero was good, the villain was bad. The hero won because goodness was supposed to win. That was the agreement between the company and the audience. Bret Hart moved the archetype forward in a more technical direction. He was smaller than the typical WWE champion. He won through craft and precision rather than size and power, and because of that, his victories carried genuine weight. Rey Mysterio pushed it even further. A man under 6 feet tall, using speed and creativity to defeat opponents twice his size. The underdog as a visual reality, not just a narrative convenience. Then the Attitude Era arrived and changed everything. Steve Austin did not win by being virtuous. He won by being angry. He was not fighting for justice in the traditional sense. He was fighting for himself, against authority, against the system, against his boss. And millions of people who felt the same way about their own lives attached themselves to that story. The Rock was similar. He was not vulnerable. He was dominant, but the crowd loved him because he was cool, because he was funny, because watching him felt good. The moral contract that defined the earlier eras dissolved. Fans stopped cheering for the hero because the hero was good. They started cheering for whoever made them feel something. This is the moment the underdog started dying, and most people did not notice because the product was at its commercial peak. The PG era attempted to reverse course. John Cena was positioned as the clean, family-friendly champion who overcame manufactured odds. And what happened was instructive. The audience, conditioned by years of Austin and Rock, rejected him loudly and consistently. Adult men booed Cena out of arenas, not because he was a bad performer, but because his version of the underdog felt dishonest. He was too big, too dominant, too corporate to convince anyone he was genuinely struggling. The company had already broken the audience's ability to believe. Daniel Bryan is the exception that proves the rule. His journey to the main event of WrestleMania 30 is the last time a true underdog story worked in WWE on that scale. And the reason it worked was specific. The suppression his character faced on screen reflected something the audience genuinely believed was happening backstage. Fans knew WWE management had doubts about his size. They knew the company preferred a different kind of champion, so when Bryan overcame that on screen, it did not feel scripted. It felt like a real victory over a real institution. The problem is that WWE drew the wrong lesson from it. They concluded that the formula was put a smaller wrestler in losing situations, and the audience will eventually rally behind them. So they applied that logic to performer after performer, and it produced the opposite result. Instead of sympathy, repeated losses created the impression of failure. The audience stopped believing those performers could win. They became what the wrestling industry calls geeks, talented people the crowd had been trained to see as losers. Chad Gable, Cedric Alexander, Apollo Crews, Sami Zayn in his early main roster run, all of them subjected to losing streaks designed to generate sympathy that never came because the company had no plan to pay it off. WWE was terrible at it, and they did it over and over again. The person most responsible for this failure was Vince McMahon. His bias toward large, physically imposing athletes was documented and well known. He wanted his underdogs to look like titans. The most extended example of this contradiction was Roman Reigns in the years before his heel turn. A man who stood 6 feet 3 inches and weighed 265 pounds, related to The Rock, physically resembling a comic book antagonist, was booked as a scrappy underdog battling corporate authority. The audience rejected it completely and immediately. You cannot ask someone to feel sympathy for a person who looks like the final boss. McMahon's management style made the problem worse. He scripted promos so heavily that wrestlers lost the natural cadence that made audiences connect with them. He punished creative failure by doubling down on his own instincts rather than listening to the performers. And he tolerated an internal culture where organic popularity was viewed with suspicion rather than celebrated. Brian Gewirtz, who served as WWE's head writer for years, recounted the booking of WrestleMania 19. Booker T had genuine fan support. He was the underdog. He was supposed to be the one the audience was rooting for to defeat Triple H. Gewirtz advocated for Booker T to win. Management decided against it, concerned the title change would be lost in the larger context of the event. Booker T lost. The audience felt cheated, and nothing was done with Booker T afterward to justify the decision. That story repeated itself in different forms for 2 decades. Then Vince McMahon left, and Paul Levesque took over creative. If you asked most wrestling fans 3 years ago whether Levesque's era would solve the underdog problem, many of them would have said yes. He built NXT on the model of long-term storytelling and character development. He was credited with changing the internal culture of WWE from a toxic, fear-driven environment to one built on collaboration. All of that is true, and none of it brought the underdog back. Title reigns became historic in their length. Roman Reigns held the Universal Championship for over 1,300 days. Gunther held the Intercontinental Championship for 666 days. These are impressive numbers. They reflect a philosophy of building value through scarcity, through treating championships as meaningful objects rather than props that change hands on television every few weeks. But there is a structural consequence to this approach. When the audience watches a match between a dominant champion and a challenger, they are not experiencing genuine uncertainty. They understand the booking logic. They know the title is not changing unless it is WrestleMania or a major premium live event. They know the underdog is not winning on a Monday night. That knowledge is incompatible with the emotional experience of rooting for someone. You cannot cheer desperately for a miracle you already know is not coming. Levesque made champions feel important, and in doing so, he made challengers feel irrelevant. The Sami Zayn situation is the clearest illustration of where this leads. Zayn's run inside the Bloodline storyline generated some of the most organic fan reactions WWE has produced in years. He was genuinely sympathetic. The character was anxious, desperate for approval, caught between loyalty and integrity. When he finally turned on Roman Reigns to protect Kevin Owens, the crowd reaction was real in the way reactions rarely are anymore. And then the company had a choice. They could let Zayn be the one to end the Reigns era, or they could protect the long-term plan to have Cody Rhodes do it. The decision was made before the crowd started chanting. The crowd at Elimination Chamber in Montreal, Zayn's hometown, was as loud as any crowd in recent memory, and Zayn still lost. He won the Tag Team Championships at WrestleMania 39 with Kevin Owens. A meaningful moment, but not the moment the audience was asking for. What followed is what happens when a company tries to maintain an underdog identity without committing to underdog booking. Zayn spent the next 2 years cutting promos about self-doubt and insecurity while simultaneously defeating main event level opponents on premium live events. He is a multi-time champion. He ended Gunther's historic run. He is a WrestleMania main eventer, and WWE keeps booking him as though he is unsure he belongs. The audience noticed the contradiction. Fans started saying what they were observing plainly. You are not an underdog if you keep winning. The character who is supposed to generate sympathy through vulnerability is also the character who beat the most dominant champion in the history of the Intercontinental title. Those two things do not coexist. The result is what people started calling Sami fatigue. Audiences in certain markets began rejecting his storylines. Some turned to cheer for Chad Gable as more legitimate, not because Zayn is a bad performer, but because the booking had made his underdog label feel dishonest. WWE wanted the emotional payoff of the underdog story without paying the actual cost. The cost is vulnerability. Real, sustained, uncomfortable vulnerability. Losses that matter. Moments that feel like genuine failure. A character the audience is not sure will ever reach the top. You cannot manufacture that feeling while simultaneously giving the same character 3 championship reigns and a WrestleMania main event spot. The corporate dimension of this problem is the one that gets discussed least, but it may be the most important. WWE is no longer a wrestling company that happens to have sponsors. It is a business unit of TKO Group Holdings, a publicly traded conglomerate. The top babyface is a brand ambassador. He represents the company to shareholders. Cody Rhodes is the model for what this looks like. He arrives at events in Ram trucks. His image appears on drumstick packaging at Walmart. He is part of a multi-year campaign for Minute Maid. He hosts a podcast through a partnership with Fanatics. He is, by every metric, exactly what TKO needs its top star to be. He is also not a believable underdog. And this is not a criticism of Rhodes personally. It is a description of what the role requires. A true underdog narrative requires visible struggle. Visible struggle does not co-sponsoring ticket discounts. TKO executive Nick Khan has described WWE as always the underdog, as a company fighting for media attention. But the talent on screen are booked as invincible corporate champions. The company claims one identity while creating another. Blue chip brands do not sponsor losers. They sponsor symbols of success. So the top babyface must be a symbol of success. And symbols of success are not underdogs by definition. This is not going to change. The sponsorship infrastructure is now foundational to how TKO generates revenue from WWE. Removing it would require restructuring the financial model of the entire operation. So what does the audience do when the hero hero is unavailable as a genuine emotional investment. They do two things: they cheer for the villain, and they invest in the meta-narrative instead. The cheering for villains phenomenon is not a new observation. Audiences have always appreciated a compelling antagonist. But what is happening in WWE now goes further than that. Fans are not simply enjoying the heel, they are actively rooting for the defeat of the babyface. When Braun Breaker was brutalizing Sami Zayn on Raw, the audience chanted for him to do it again. When Seth Rollins stomped Zayn after a match, the crowd sang Rollins' entrance theme. The sympathy mechanism is broken. The company cannot make audiences feel sorry for a character they know is protected by a corporate booking structure. So when a babyface absorbs damage, the audience does not feel fear. They feel nothing, or they feel entertained by the spectacle. The meta-narrative investment is more interesting and more revealing. The biggest organic underdog reaction in recent WWE history was not about any on-screen character. It was about Cody Rhodes as a real person being replaced in the WrestleMania 40 main event by Dwayne Johnson. Fans who had watched Rhodes work for decades, who had seen him leave WWE and rebuild his career independently, who understood the business context of what was being proposed, rallied behind him because they believed a real injustice was being done to a real person. The Finish the Story movement worked because it bypassed the fictional frame entirely. People were not rooting for a character, they were rooting for a human being against a corporate decision. That is the only version of an underdog narrative that still functions in the current era. And the moment Rhodes won the championship and the meta-narrative concluded, a portion of the audience immediately began discussing his heel turn. Because once the real-world story was resolved, all that remained was a dominant corporate champion in expensive suits. And dominant corporate champions are not interesting to cheer for indefinitely. The trajectory is clear. The underdog is not coming back as a viable long-term booking strategy in WWE. The convergence of factors is too complete. You have a booking philosophy that prioritizes long, dominant title reigns. You have a corporate requirement for aspirational, sponsor-friendly top stars. You have an audience that has been trained over 30 years to distrust vulnerability and reject weakness. You have a smart mark culture that understands booking logic well enough to know miracles are not coming on television. And you have a financial structure that makes the traditional underdog story actively counterproductive to business goals. Alternative promotions are still attempting to model. AEW books performers like Darby Allin in genuine underdog scenarios where the audience believes physical harm is possible and outcomes are uncertain. But even within that space, the approach has not produced the kind of mainstream commercial breakthrough that forces WWE to reconsider its direction. The two character types that will define WWE's babyface future are already visible. The corporate conqueror who wins because they are the company's chosen representative and who earns audience respect through real-world work ethic rather than fictional struggle. And the aesthetic anti-hero who is cheered because they are cool, because their entrance is interactive, because their presence is entertaining, entirely separate from any moral framing. Neither of these requires the audience to care whether the character wins or loses. Both of them require the audience to simply enjoy being in the room. That is a fundamentally different relationship between a promotion and its fans. The original contract of professional wrestling was emotional. You were supposed to feel something when the underdog fought. You were supposed to hold your breath. You were supposed to stand up when they finally won. WWE has replaced that contract with something more passive and more comfortable. You are supposed to be entertained. You are supposed to appreciate the presentation. You are supposed to consume the product and buy the merchandise. That works as a business model. It does not work as the thing wrestling used to be. And the audience that grew up on the thing wrestling used to be is watching the current product and feeling the absence of something they cannot always name. This video is an attempt to name it. The underdog is gone, and the company that removed it has never been more profitable. That is the story of modern WWE, and it is a far more complicated story than anyone who just misses the old days is usually willing to admit.